Two empires, one target. In the entire history of warfare, Rome and Persia had spent centuries trying to destroy each other. They had bled across generations. They had buried entire armies fighting over the same land. But in 634 AD, they stopped. They looked at each other across the battlefield, and they made a decision that shocked the ancient world. They agreed to fight together. Because there was a man in the desert they both feared more than each other. His name was Khalid ibn al-Walid. And what happened next? Neither empire ever recovered from. It is 634 AD. Barely a year has passed since the Battle of Walaja, since Khalid ibn al-Walid carved through Mesopotamia like a blade through silk. The Sassanid Persian Empire had already suffered catastrophic losses. Their finest generals outmaneuvered, their best armies shattered, their confidence in tatters. And to the northwest, the Byzantine Roman Empire was watching. Emperor Heraclius, the man who had humiliated Persia just decades earlier, was receiving reports that turned his blood cold. One Muslim general, undefeated, moving at impossible speed, thinking in ways no commander alive had seen before. Heraclius had a choice. He could wait and let Persia absorb the blow, or he could act. He chose to act. And for the first time in living memory, Rome and Persia sent armies to fight the same enemy, at the same time, in the same campaign. The Byzantine force dispatched towards Syria and the surrounding region was not a raiding party. It was an army of invasion. Byzantine heavy infantry, the finest professional soldiers in the Western world, marched in tight formation, their armor gleaming, their discipline forged through decades of endless frontier warfare. Their commander was no amateur. Byzantine officers who had fought the Persians, the Slavs, the Avars. They understood large-scale war. They understood how to hold ground. And they had numbers, significant numbers. The Byzantine force alone, tens of thousands of professional soldiers. And behind them, or beside them, Persian forces were also moving. Two professional armies, two ancient military traditions, converging on one man. Two empires worth of resources. Two empires worth of experience. Two empires worth of fury. Converging on one man. The Persians were not finished. Despite everything. Despite Walaja. Despite al-Walid. Despite the losses that had staggered their empire. The Sassanid war machine was still functioning. New generals had been appointed. Fresh troops mobilized from the eastern provinces. The honor of the empire demanded a response. And now, for the first time in history, Persian commanders were communicating with Byzantine counterparts, sharing intelligence, coordinating movements. Their strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Attack from multiple directions simultaneously, stretch the Muslim forces beyond their ability to respond, force Khalid to divide his army to meet each threat. And then, when he was divided, when he was stretched, when he was reacting instead of acting, destroy him piece by piece. It was the kind of strategy that had worked against every enemy Rome and Persia had ever faced. They were confident. They had not yet fully understood who they were dealing with. The reports arrived in rapid succession. Byzantine forces moving from the north, Persian forces pressing from the east, a strategic net being drawn around the Muslim position. Khalid's commanders were grim. The mathematics were brutal. Muslim forces spread across a vast area. To concentrate them quickly enough against two of the most powerful armies on earth seemed almost impossible. Almost. Khalid listened to every report. He asked precise questions. He studied his maps in silence. And then he did something that stunned his own commanders. He didn't retreat. He didn't consolidate defensively. He didn't wait. He launched a preemptive strike. Not against one enemy, against both. At the same time. What Khalid understood, and what both Rome and Persia failed to anticipate, was that their strategy's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Coordination takes time. Two armies from different empires, speaking different languages, with different command structures, different supply chains, and centuries of mutual suspicion, cannot move as one. He moved at a speed that ancient warfare was simply not designed to cope with. His cavalry, fast, lean, disciplined, covered distances considered impossible. He struck the Byzantine allied forces before they could fully coordinate with the Persian column, then immediately repositioned, then struck again in a different direction. The coordinated net that Rome and Persia had drawn around him never fully closed, because by the time each element was ready to tighten, Khalid had already moved. It was not one battle. It was a campaign of relentless, disorienting speed, a sequence of engagements so rapid that the combined Roman-Persian strategy simply could not adapt fast enough. For the Roman commanders, trained in the tradition of disciplined positional warfare, it was deeply disorienting. Their training had not prepared them for an enemy that refused to fight on Roman terms. For the Persian commanders, who had at least faced Arab raiders before, the scale and discipline of what Khalid was doing was something entirely different. These were not raiders. At Dathin, Byzantine forces were engaged and broken before Persian reinforcements could reach them. In the operations around the Syrian frontier, Khalid's cavalry appeared where it was not expected, struck before defensive positions could be established, and withdrew before counterattacks could be organized. The Muslim forces were everywhere and nowhere. They struck, they vanished, they reappeared, they struck again. For the Persian commanders, this was a professional army operating at a level of strategic sophistication they had not anticipated. But there was one moment when the plan almost worked. A combined force, Byzantine and Persian, operating in closer coordination than at any other point in the campaign, succeeded in converging on Khalid's position. The Muslim army found itself facing pressure from multiple sides simultaneously. Reinforcements could not get through. Supply lines were threatened. For a brief, terrifying window, the trap was working. Khalid's response to this moment is what separates him from every other commander of his era. He did not panic. He did not attempt to retreat. He did not try to defend in all directions at once. He identified the weakest point in the ring. He concentrated everything he had at that single point, and he broke through it. Not a fighting retreat, a violent, aggressive, concentrated breakout. Cavalry at full charge directly into the junction between the Byzantine and Persian forces. The precise point where two different armies, with two different commanders and two different command cultures, were least able to coordinate their response. He hit the ceiling. The ceiling broke, and the ring collapsed. Once the junction broke, the coordination that had made the combined force dangerous evaporated instantly. Byzantine commanders, suddenly unsupported, made the rational decision to pull back. Persian commanders, watching the Byzantine withdrawal, could no longer execute the coordinated pressure the strategy required. Each army fell back to its own logic, its own priorities, its own defensive instincts. The net came apart. And Khalid, who had been on the defensive moments earlier, immediately went back on the offensive. He pursued the withdrawing forces with the same relentless speed he had used throughout the campaign. Units that had been part of a coordinated strategy an hour earlier were now isolated, unsupported, and facing a commander who never stopped attacking. The casualties inflicted in the pursuit exceeded the casualties from the battles themselves. By the time the campaign reached its conclusion, both Roman and Persian forces had withdrawn from their forward positions. The coordinated strategy, the grand alliance designed to eliminate the Muslim threat once and for all, had failed completely. One man's speed of thought had outpaced two. Empire's ability to coordinate. The failure of the combined Roman-Persian campaign was not merely a military defeat, it was a strategic catastrophe for both empires. For the Sassanid Persian Empire, already weakened, this campaign accelerated a collapse that was becoming impossible to stop. An empire that had stood for 4 centuries, that had challenged Rome to a standstill across generations. Gone. For the Byzantine Roman Empire, The Syrian territories, Palestine, Egypt, the richest provinces of the Byzantine world were now exposed. Heraclius's decision to engage had exposed the limits of Roman strategic flexibility. Both empires had tried. Both empires had failed. But Khalid ibn al-Walid knew that what had just happened was not the end. It was a door opening. Caliph Abu Bakr was already writing a letter that would send Khalid ibn al-Walid on the most extraordinary march in military history. 1,800 miles, multiple armies, multiple battles, from Iraq to Syria, in 30 days. They would call it the March Across the Desert. And when Khalid arrived at the gates of Damascus, the Byzantine Empire would realize that what came before had merely been the warning. The legend was still only beginning.